Imagine this. It's a blistering hot day in the Judean desert, 1946.
Right.
And you have this moment of just accidental, totally earth-shattering discovery. A shepherd, maybe he's looking for a lost goat, who knows, and he stumbles upon a cave.
Near the Dead Sea, yeah.
Exactly. And inside that cave, he finds a clay jar.
Yeah.
And when he breaks it open, he doesn't just find some old brittle scrolls. He shatters 2,000 years of, well, profound silence.
I mean, it really is the ultimate archaeological cold case.
It is.
That text, a text that was never, ever meant to be found by human hands again, it held a history so disruptive, so intrinsically forbidden, that entire empires had dedicated themselves for millennia to erasing its memory.
Just wiping it off the map.
Wiping it from the accepted canon, yeah.
And that's exactly what we're doing today.
Yeah.
We are diving deep into that forbidden memory.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack the source material surrounding what has to be the most censored text in ancient history, the Book of Enoch. This is the story of the seventh prophet, the man who, the stories say, walked with God. And crucially, who was shown the entire operating system of the cosmos, only to have his writings buried and cursed.
And our mission today is really to move beyond the Sunday school stories.
Way beyond.
The source material we're looking at argues that this text reveals a fundamental schism in the divine structure.
Okay.
It argues that it exposes a ruling lineage that didn't just disappear after the flood, and that it outlines a system of control based entirely on the strategic suppression of knowledge.
So if this account is true, history isn't a spiritual journey of faith at all.
No. It's a political struggle, a struggle for dominance.
Okay, let's unpack that. We're not talking about just any minor prophet here. This man, Enoch, he was so revered, so central to ancient thought, that he wasn't contained by a single tradition.
Not at all. And the sources tell us that the Egyptians, they knew him as
That, the divine scribe, the inventor of writing.
And the Greeks called him Hermes Trismegistus.
The master of esoteric wisdom.
And that cross-cultural connection is absolutely critical. We have to linger on it for just a second.
Please.
What did Thoth and Hermes actually represent across these vast, often competing civilizations? They were the keepers of the secrets, right?
The keepers, yeah.
The mediators between the divine and the human, the first divine writers. They didn't just transmit, ethical rules or simple dogma. They transmitted the map.
The blueprint.
The blueprint of how the entire cosmos works. We're talking advanced mathematics, astrology, architecture. This immediately positions Enoch not as some messenger delivering simple instructions,
no,
but as an architect of a powerful and deeply forbidden truth.
An architect whose blueprint became, a monumental problem for the powers that eventually rose up to dominate the world.
A huge problem.
And the fact that all these different, warring cultures all had a version of the same first teacher. It just underscores how uniform this hidden history really was.
So when the text of Enoch emerged, or I should say persisted against all odds, the shock for the burgeoning Roman-influenced religious structure was? It was tectonic. The Book of Enoch simply did not fit the desired narrative framework. Its specific details, they had to be purged.
But why such drastic measures? I mean, texts are often excluded for, minor theological disagreements, a little argument about rituals or some minor prophet. Why was this one declared apocryphal, cursed, and forbidden?
Yeah.
Why did it require such aggressive, almost like violent censorship across multiple continents?
Because it exposed a lineage.
A lineage.
And our sources are very deliberate in their phrasing. They use the term a soyu. Now, we could just translate that as a bloodline, but soyu, it carries a much heavier weight.
Oh, so?
It implies a genealogical, hierarchical, and institutionalized chain of command. It implies a history of rule, not just descent.
Okay, so Enoch wasn't just telling stories.
No, he was detailing exactly who was in charge, where they came from, and critically, how they established their rule after the flood.
So you're suggesting that reading Enoch reveals that the supreme figure being worshipped by this rising empire.
Yeah.
He wasn't the absolute eternal creator.
Precisely.
He was a powerful but limited entity.
Exactly. If you follow the material, you realize the god being served by the new, Romanized power structure was a figure with immense power, yes, but also with immense fragility.
Fragility, that's an interesting word.
The core message of the new codified religion was simple. Obey. Do not question.
Right.
Enoch, however, provided a meticulous family tree of the divine, complete with rivalries, with betrayal, with political maneuvers.
Which would utterly shatter the concept of a singular, unquestionable, absolute creator who demands, simple, blind obedience.
Of course.
Because if that creator is actually a commander with a chain of command, he can be questioned. His authority isn't absolute, it's just superior.
So that is the threat. The ruling entity, as described in Enoch, was a fearful commander who ruled through structured fear, not unconditional love.
Right.
The moment you introduce an alternative narrative about these fallen, powerful entities teaching humans advanced science technology that equals or even surpasses the commander's own, you invite a lethal dose of skepticism about the entire divine hierarchy.
So the god in Enoch feared losing control.
And he feared humanity's new knowledge. That fear is absolutely not conducive to the narrative of an omnipotent, benevolent authority.
So we're moving beyond simple editing here.
Yeah.
We are talking about a historical act of, cultural genocide.
I think that's a fair way to put it.
The intentional erasure of vast swaths of human knowledge to protect a specific power structure and, as you say, a soyu.
The sources confirm this was a deliberate campaign. It wasn't just, a handful of books here and there. Great libraries were systematically targeted, turned to ash.
The burning of Alexandria is the big one everyone knows.
That's the famous example. But this suppression happened globally, repeatedly, wherever this centralized dogma gained traction. Then came the theological consolidation. Our material notes that religious authorities spent almost 90 years debating what exactly constituted the Word of God.
90 years. That's a lifetime. So in 90 years of political wrangling, basically. Not to discover spiritual truth, but to select the most politically useful history.
They needed to construct a stable political platform for the rising empires. It was all about control, and the predictable result of that 90-year process.
Let me guess. The selection of texts that supported the fearful, centralized ruler figure.
Exactly. They chose narratives of obedience, of sacrifice, and of the absolute punishment for curiosity.
And everything that challenged that narrative, everything that detailed the actual history of the fallen angels, the Watchers, their scientific gifts, their bloodline.
Censored. Gone. It sounds like they were trying to protect not just a specific interpretation of God.
No, they were protecting the lineage. The lineage of the Watchers who, according to these sources, didn't vanish. They just went into hiding and assumed new roles.
The censorship was the foundation of the fortress. It's a terrifying thought when you really stop to consider it.
Yeah.
That the historical narrative we accept as divine truth was forged not for spiritual clarity, but for continuous political and hierarchical control over the masses.
But the truth, as it always does, found a way.
It leads us right to the keepers of memory.
The Essenes.
Yes, the Essenes. This ascetic scholarly community responsible for hiding these scrolls near the Dead Sea. They were executed or died protecting this memory, and crucially, they weren't preserving it for their immediate community.
No, they were preserving it for the future.
For now, for you. The act of hiding the text, of sealing it in those caves, was an act of profound faith in humanity's eventual inevitable curiosity.
Wow.
They believed the truth, no matter how deeply buried it was beneath dogma and imperial censorship, always finds the light, even if it takes 2 millennia and a curious shepherd.
They were playing the longest long game in history, the ultimate time capsule, holding not treasure, but a criminal history.
So the narrative of Enoch, it dramatically shifts our focus from this sort of distant celestial politicking to a physical, catastrophic event on Earth.
Right.
This is the descent that sets the entire chain of events, the flood, the censorship, the hidden bloodline. It sets it all into motion.
And this is the famous story of the 200 Watchers, or as our sources also call them, the Guscular. They descended from the high heavens. So why? Why did they abandon their posts?
Well, this was no spiritual falling out. The text describes it as a physical, purposeful landing on Mount Hermon.
So they came with intent.
With a very specific intent. The Watchers broke their sacred oath because they saw the daughters of men and they desired them. Their pact was sworn with a catastrophic result in mind, that they would either all succeed or all fall together, a pact of solidarity.
And the consequence of this forbidden union, this is where we get the race of giants, the Nephilim.
Yes, a hybrid race of immense size and an insatiable appetite. The text describes immediate chaos. These Nephilim, they began consuming the world, just devouring all resources, all animal life.
Biological plague.
Exactly. And here is where the horror really ramps up. When there was nothing left to consume, the Nephilim turned on each other, and then they began to consume themselves, drinking human blood and warring against the humans who couldn't feed them anymore.
It's just a spiral of self-destruction.
Absolute. Escalating decay.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because the popular, the censored narrative, it focuses entirely on the lust, the breaking of the sacred oath.
Right.
That's the sin they teach in most texts. But our sources are emphatic about this. The Watchers' true sin was not lust. Lust merely produced the giants. Their cosmic crime was knowledge.
That is the crucial censored distinction. The Nephilim were the symptom of the Watcher's lust, but the transmission of knowledge. That was the direct affront to the ruling commander. Enoch meticulously details the specific advanced technologies these 200 Watchers taught humanity, led by two key figures, Shemihaza, the leader, and Azazel, the primary instructor.
And what exactly did they teach? I mean, we're talking about things that would fundamentally alter the course of human development.
Absolutely. The Watchers taught humanity the secrets of the cosmos, the movements of the stars, astronomy, celestial mechanics.
So science?
Hard science. They taught meteorology and divination. Shemihaza taught the art of enchantments and root cuttings. But Azazel, and our source highlights him, he was the most dangerous instructor.
Because he taught war.
He taught the forging of metals, the making of weapons, shields, breastplates, the art of war. But he also taught cosmetics and jewelry.
Wait, hold on. Why is teaching makeup and jewelry grouped together with forging iron for war? That seems odd.
Because the sin wasn't just about lethal technology, it was about deception. Azazel taught women how to adorn themselves, how to change their appearance, how to be deceptive to lure men, and to change the natural form of the obedient worker. The original human, the Adamu, was meant to be simple, unadorned.
Right.
With metalworking and cosmetics, humanity suddenly gained the ability to kill efficiently and to hide their true nature.
So humanity, once obedient, once content in this simpler, pre-designed existence, now possessed what the source calls divine fire.
Divine fire.
They could track the stars, which means they could predict the future or celestial events without any help from the rulers. They learned the path of sin, the way of deception. They gained technological and strategic agency.
And that, for the commander, that was the core conflict. The original act of rebellion in this narrative is technological.
It's industrial espionage.
It is. Why would a divine being prohibit science, mathematics, and metallurgy unless that knowledge directly threatened their control and reduced their magic to mere advanced physics?
Yeah.
The moment humanity became scientifically and technologically advanced, they stopped being compliant slaves.
They became rivals.
They became rivals. And the world quickly descended into absolute anarchy because of these gifts from the Watchers. The chaos, the rampant murder, the screams of humanity, the sheer volume of suffering caused by the giants and the new technologies of war. It reached the high heavens.
And the Archangels hear it.
Yes. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, they were the observers, the executors of celestial law, and they stood before their Lord to report the systemic decay, the broken covenant, and the blood-stained earth.
So they're reporting a failed experiment.
A cosmic experiment gone horribly, horribly wrong due to unauthorized technological transfer. And this plea for justice, it sets up the divine response, which, according to Enoch's terrifying scroll, is less about saving humanity and more about restoring order.
It's a judicial moment. It's a highly structured military intervention, not some compassionate act of redemption.
Not at all. And this section, it really analyzes what the source material presents as Enoch's most radical theological claim: the true identity and nature of the divine figure giving the orders.
Right.
And the sources are extremely clear on this. This figure was not the absolute, unconditional creator of the cosmos.
He was, as the source describes him, a ruler, a powerful and divine and jealous commander. Okay, if we accept that premise, how does the source material reconcile that with the traditional understanding of omnipotence? I mean, does Enoch provide any evidence that this figure had rivals or limits?
Absolutely. The mere presence of armies, of guards, of a throne, it implies hierarchy and vulnerability.
A true creator wouldn't need a bodyguard.
An absolute creator would require no defense, no rivalries, and certainly no fear. But the commander in Enoch's text is surrounded by thousands of guards. His decrees are issued like military orders. He shows all the psychological hallmarks of a powerful but fearful regional governor who has lost control of his territory.
And his response to the chaos just confirms this interpretation. It wasn't pity, it wasn't compassion that drove his action. It was outright anger.
Anger at the betrayal. and the loss of his workforce.
He chose to cleanse the world, not save it. That's a huge difference.
A radical difference. He wasn't mourning the loss of life. He was eliminating the threat posed by the scientifically enlightened humans and the monstrous Nephilim hybrids. He was terrified of losing control.
And terrified of humanity possessing knowledge of celestial mechanics and warfare.
If he ruled through fear and jealousy, that means his power is conditional. It's not absolute.
So the source material posits that the real creator, the true source of everything, the unconditional light,
Right.
would require no throne, no army, and certainly no human emotion like jealousy.
Right.
The fact that Enoch describes a god sitting on a throne surrounded by legions of armed guards is, according to this interpretation, proof of his limitation.
It's a compelling argument. And the judgment? It was swift and military. It was a cleanup operation, executed with frightening precision. It shows the commander's control over his celestial forces.
And we see the explicit military orders issued to the Archangels.
Yes, Uriel, the Archangel of Light, was sent to warn Lamech's son, Noah, about the impending flood that would wash away the corruption. So, a preservation effort for a selected lineage. But the judgment against the rebels was far more severe. Raphael was ordered to bind Azazel.
The one who taught war and deception?
The very one, and to cast him into the outer darkness, covering him with rough and jagged rocks until the final day of judgment. The teachers of forbidden knowledge faced the harshest penalty.
Because the commander understood that knowledge was the engine of the rebellion.
He knew. But the Watchers didn't just stand there and wait for execution. The source describes a violent, unremembered war that raged in the skies for an entire age before the final flood.
This wasn't just a passive roundup.
No, this was a full-scale battle between the commander's celestial legions and the 200 fallen Watchers and their forces. And Enoch, the writer of justice, he was placed right in the middle.
An emissary.
He was sent as an emissary, carrying the petition of the fallen angels to their judging superior, offering repentance.
And what was the commander's definitive answer to this petition for peace?
He was unequivocal. Peace will not be.
Wow.
He demanded to know why they had abandoned the high heavens to defile themselves with women and corrupt the earth with their forbidden knowledge. The covenant was permanently broken. The war was final.
So the flood was just the tactical deployment of water to cleanse the field after the aerial battle had already been won.
That's the idea. And speaking of the blending of races and the survival of a chosen lineage, we absolutely have to detail the mystery surrounding Noah's birth, as described in Enoch.
Right. This is a key piece of evidence.
It shows the angelic intrusion was permanent. Lamech, Noah's father, was deeply terrified and distraught by his own child.
He was scared of his own son.
The account describes the baby's body shining like the sun. His face and form were unlike any human child he had ever seen. His voice was not that of a human baby.
So Lamech was convinced the child was not of human origin.
He was convinced he was of the angels, and he ran to Enoch, the only person he trusted with access to divine knowledge, for confirmation.
Why did this physical appearance cause him such panic, though?
Because Lamech understood the gravity of the Watcher's sin. If his son was a hybrid, even a chosen, beneficial hybrid, it meant the pollution had already entered his own line.
Oh, wow.
Enoch calmed him. He confirmed the child was chosen for survival and would live through the great destruction, but the implication remains.
The lineage selected for survival, Noah's line, was potentially not purely human.
Or at least it carried the DNA markers of these celestial beings. The system allowed a hybrid line to survive the cleansing, to rebuild a new world, but under a leash.
So the world was cleaned, the era of the Watchers and the Giants was submerged and forgotten. And when the waters receded, the gods retreated, but they left behind survivors to build a new world, a world of engineered obedience.
Maintaining the separation between the rulers and the ruled. The strength of the material we're studying is that it recognizes the story of the Watchers is not, it's not unique to a single text or culture.
No.
Our sources emphasize this point by drawing direct parallel narratives from Sumer. This connects the hidden history to a massive global pattern.
So we're moving from the Book of Enoch to the cuneiform tablets of Mesopotamia. This is where the conspiracy of the soyu becomes, historical fact, according to them.
Exactly. The Sumerian narrative of the Anunnaki.
Those who came from heaven to earth.
It mirrors the Watchers perfectly. Sumerian texts spoke openly of a time when these highly advanced beings needed a workforce, and they didn't rely on simple natural creation. They designed life.
Okay, how specific are the sources on this design process?
They're quite specific. The sources detail that the Anunnaki took the existing hominid, the ape form, and genetically modified its shape, infusing it with their own essence to create Adamo.
The first obedient worker.
The first worker, yes. This wasn't creation out of nothing. It was a biological modification to produce efficient, compliant labor. And this gives us the perfect context for the question we asked earlier.
Why would a commander, God forbid, science, cosmology, and metallurgy to a slave race?
Right?
Because if humanity was engineered as compliant labor, as biological automata, then forbidden knowledge like astronomy or warfare is simply dangerous industrial espionage. The Watchers taught the workers how to use the tools of the masters. This enabled them to realize their status and stage a labor revolt driven by science.
So the flood was the termination of the failed experiment. But, and this is a huge but, the source is adamant that not all traces were wiped out. The Nephilim, the hybrid offspring of the Watchers, they were not entirely wiped out by the flood.
That contradicts the definitive finality you see in other texts. How did they survive, according to Enoch's narrative?
Their descendants survived. And they became the semi-gods and rulers of the post-flood world, a new, powerful, noble class.
So they didn't go into permanent exile.
No, they simply concealed themselves behind new masks, new names, new empires. They became the foundational elite, establishing the first dynasties, the Sumerian kings, the early Egyptian pharaohs. They laid claim to the ultimate birthright, the union of the gods' blue blood and man's red blood.
Ah, there it is, the term blue blood. We use it synonymously with aristocracy today, but the source is suggesting it's not just a poetic title.
It's a literal claim.
A literal claim to the Watcher heritage, to the celestial DNA.
And it's the mechanism of control itself. Our sources argue that this bloodline, this soyu, is maintained through the use of overt psychological symbols.
Okay.
Think about the blue and red dynamic woven into our society. We are taught to see blue and red as indicators of power, protection, authority.
Police lights.
Police lights, military uniforms, royal banners, even political party colors.
You're saying this is the oldest and most effective method of psychological control. How does that actually operate today? How does it make the theory tangible?
It's a constant subliminal reminder of who is in charge. It's a visual display of sovereignty.
The divine blue.
The celestial, cold authority.
Mixed with the human red.
Blood, labor, passion. Every time you see a flag using those colors or a uniform, you are subconsciously referencing the union of the ruler's blood and the ruled's blood. It establishes the foundational, unchangeable hierarchy. They are the hybrids who possess the right to rule because of their celestial heritage.
So if you can't crush a belief system, you absorb it. You lead it from within.
That is the ultimate strategy of the controlling lineage to maintain power across millennia. The strategy was sophisticated assimilation. The Watchers' descendants, they understood that simply banning old rituals just creates martyrs.
Right.
So instead, they adopted the existing framework and just changed the masks. Old pagan festivals were given new saints and new names, celebrated on the same dates, with often the same rituals.
It's brilliant, in a way.
It ensures that even when people think they are rebelling against the old system, they are simply submitting to the new, subtle mask of the same underlying lineage.
Can you give us an example of this assimilation in action? Something that connects the ancient lineage to the modern system.
The source material often cites the Roman Empire's shift. When Christianity became the state religion, they didn't abolish the sun cult, they absorbed it.
Sol Invictus.
The celebration of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, on December 25th was simply reassigned to the birth of Christ. They didn't eliminate the concept of the divine child born to a virgin, they incorporated it.
So you ensure continuous obedience to the system, regardless of the figurehead.
This system merely changed its theological costume to match the dominant cultural thread, guaranteeing the continuation of the ruling class.
So those 90 years of theological debate we discussed earlier, they weren't just deciding what was holy, they were building a new fortress.
A labyrinth?
A labyrinth of acceptable dogma.
A labyrinth built not to protect spiritual truth, but to protect the soyu, the lineage of the Watchers that still holds sway on Earth. This whole apparatus of codified religion is, according to this radical interpretation, a construct. It's designed to keep humanity within walls built by the descendants of the rulers.
To keep us busy fighting about the details inside the cage.
While the true history remains buried outside. But the individual truth, The knowledge of the map Enoch carried, that has to be sought alone, beyond the dogmas and beyond the walls.
Enoch's journey wasn't just historical. It was prophetic and, well, scientific. When he was taken up, he was given the ultimate tour, shown the cosmic map by the angel Uriel.
Right.
He didn't just receive theological instruction, he received an education in astrophysics.
The descriptions are astonishingly technical. I mean, this is why the knowledge had to be forbidden. It reduces the gods to advanced beings who were just utilizing technology.
It demystifies them.
Completely. Enoch spoke of celestial mechanisms, the precise cycles of the moon, and then the most startling detail. He described dark wells in the void that swallow even light.
He's describing black holes, or some kind of gravitational singularity, thousands of years before modern science even hypothesized their existence. That detail alone validates the source's claim that this knowledge wasn't mythological, it was empirical, taught to him by a celestial guide.
And that empirical knowledge was exactly the threat. It gave humans too much insight into the mechanical workings of the cosmos, reducing the magic of the ruling commander to mere advanced technology.
Because knowledge neutralizes fear.
Exactly. And Enoch also received the prophetic scroll. He viewed time not linearly, but as a defined historical sequence, a 10-week scroll.
Okay, what does that mean?
The scroll maps out the entire cosmic timeline. 7 ages have already passed, which means we are living deep in the shadow of the 8th or 9th week, according to the source's interpretation.
Into the final weeks.
The final weeks signal the ultimate judgment and, critically, the return of the celestial lords to reclaim their creation.
What specifically did Enoch warn about for the final ages that, connects to our current reality?
He warned of a specific time when the seasons would blur and the natural cycles would become corrupted.
Climate change, ecological collapse.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it? He warned that human pride, fueled by the inherited arrogance of the fallen angels, would swell to the point where man would believe he is God.
Technological hubris.
The technological and intellectual hubris is identified as the final stage before the return and the final reckoning. We are living in a time where we attempt to control every biological and environmental process, which perfectly matches the description of overwhelming human pride.
Let's focus on the technology of the gods for a second, because Enoch's descriptions of the divine environment, they read less like spiritual mythology and more like the engineering specs of a highly advanced military operation.
Oh, absolutely. He described the beings who govern these zones as living fire columns, entities of pure energy capable of taking human form at will.
Which suggests advanced camouflage or energy manipulation.
And the structure, the vehicle he traveled in, was indescribably advanced. It had ceilings of live crystal, foundations built from lightning and horn beams, a technology that, crucially, could not be crippled by primitive human weapons.
So this sounds like a controlled high-tech environment. Are we talking about a blueprint for a device, a communication tool, or even a weapon rather than a spiritual arc?
It suggests a device capable of traversing immense distances and maintaining internal stability, a highly sophisticated vessel or communication hub. The entire divine environment Enoch describes is militaristic. The commander, the god he saw, was surrounded by thousands of guards, legions of flaming attendants, massive hierarchical power structures.
And this just reinforces the core theory you laid out earlier. A true absolute creator needs no protection. A ruler who manages a territory and fears loss of control absolutely does.
The immense power of these beings is real, but so is their immense fragility and their need for defense and hierarchy. The entire system, the suppression of knowledge, the armies, the technology, it was all designed to protect the Watcher's lineage, who are the gods on Earth, and to protect the commander's territory from further rebellion.
This technological interpretation, it helps us understand the constant repetition of the ascent or contact story across different cultures, which the source explicitly draws parallels to.
Right, it's always a fiery cloud or a chariot.
Exactly.
Think about the common pattern. Enoch being transported in his crystal structure.
Moses disappearing into a cloud of fire and smoke on Sinai.
Muhammad ascending on the winged horse, Burak. Even Alexander the Great's flying chariot mentioned in later texts.
Or Apollo's fiery sun chariot in Greek mythology.
These are just different cultural names for the same impossible recurring technology.
So the inescapable conclusion we have to draw is that these rulers, these powerful commanders and their armies, they are not the absolute source.
No, they are a barrier. A highly controlled, highly visible technological and hierarchical structure positioned between humanity and the true absolute creator.
And that ultimate creator,
according to the source material, requires no fear, no armies, and no obedience based on threat.
The ultimate message, then, is that the systems, Rome, the Umayyads, the various codified religions, they were all successful because they managed to capture the divine narrative. And they used that fear to control the masses, creating the final wall between us and true faith.
And that system is maintained by this advanced technology, which ensures that only the select few are able to breach the atmosphere and contact the ruling commander, maintaining the illusion of spiritual ascent while restricting access for everyone else.
So after all that, what does this all mean for us? For you, the listener, living in the shadow of this 10th week. The Watchers may be bound to the outer darkness, but their blood and their ambitions, they clearly remain on Earth. They founded the systems we live under.
We have inherited a profound contradiction, a real one. We inherited their anger, their jealousy, their destructive pride, the same technological hubris that ruined the early Earth.
Right.
But critically, we also inherited the desire to question them, that original spark of divine fire they gifted us.
So the war never truly ended.
It simply moved from the sky to the battleground of the human soul.
And the ultimate control is achieved when the fight is internalized. We are now the new gods of this planet, with our own terrifying science, and we are repeating the exact failure described in Enoch's scroll. We're consuming the world, generating endless war, and turning our technology inward towards self-destruction.
The contrast drawn by the source material is stark, and I think it's necessary for this moment. Religion is the system, the cage. It's the institutional construct built to protect the lineage and demand fear. Faith, however, is the journey. It's the key. It's the individual path walked beyond those theological walls, and the systems have successfully done everything they can to conflate the two to ensure that obedience to the cage feels like an act of genuine faith.
And as the systems continue to govern through fear, we face a new deluge, just as Enoch predicted.
Right.
It's not a flood of water this time, is it? It's a flood of information. A new, sophisticated way to bury the truth, not by censorship, but by overwhelming, contradictory, disposable noise.
The truth is scattered. It's buried beneath an avalanche of data.
Yet, the Essenes protected the memory, for now, for you, for the moment when the container of dogma is finally broken and the question is revealed.
The war is still being waged inside us between the inherited pride of the fallen angels and the true, yearning nature of the human spirit that seeks the absolute source.
And the ultimate provocation left for us by this hidden history is this. Enoch's prophecy, the 10-week scroll, it was not fully written down. The 9th age ends, the prophecy ends, and our choice begins. The truth was never in the scroll itself. It was always in the search for what was lost.
Questioning the narrative, seeking the unwritten history, demanding the original blueprint. That is the first step to true knowledge. It is ultimately the first act of real sovereign faith.